Okay, welcome to El Maestro. My name is Victor Lecha III. You are with me. Welcome to the second episode of this podcast. I'm glad that you are here with me today. Today is April 19th, day before Easter. If you're celebrating Easter, happy Easter. You're Muslim. Yeah, but we believe in Easter. We believe Jesus rose. Not trying to make this into a theological podcast, but I hope you have a great time with your families. Just some things to get out of the way. I know I spoke to you on the first podcast, but I like to say it in case you're just joining now. The first thing is that I sometimes munch on these podcasts, and I hope that doesn't deter you. But sometimes I need a little bit of energy to give me the energy that I need to give you the content that you require. So I might be munching on some chips or some crisps, as we say in the United Kingdom, or maybe drinking a Monster, so that way then I can have, as I said earlier, the energy to give you the kind of podcast that I think you require. The other thing too is that I suffer from attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And how that might manifest is that I might have trouble recollecting a certain fact or a story I want to bring to you in the podcast. And if that's happening, I'll just say I'm having an ADHD moment and I'll pause the podcast. Now, that's the beautiful thing about doing a podcast as opposed to a live broadcast like radio. I can't do that. And for you, it'll be seamless. So I'm glad that you're with me today. I hope you're enjoying this gorgeous weather. Now, we're here in the Bay Area in Silicon Valley in California, so the weather's pretty nice most of the time. But it's warming up, you can tell. It got to be in the mid-70s again today, if not approaching 80, and I love that weather. So I hope wherever you are, wherever you're catching this podcast, you're enjoying the weather today. It's a gorgeous Saturday. And one thing I'll do at the top of every podcast is I'm going to go over some corrections from the last podcast. Because I don't write down everything. I have notes. I have an outline of things that I want to bring you. And I have gone over them, before the podcast. So that way then I'm ready to deliver it accurately and decisively. But I don't have everything written down. So sometimes I miss some things, or because of the ADHD, I get things mixed up, or I reverse them. So in episode 1, I was mentioning about, Donald Trump thinks the best generation in America is 1876 to 1913. And I was disputing him, saying that obviously the best generation was after World War II. And, the reasons why, because we had defeated the Nazis, we defeated the Japanese Imperial Empire, we restored political order, it became the U.S.-led world order. And then I said we launched into the greatest generation that America had ever known, which was the Boomer generation. And the economy flourished then, and the American dream flourished then. But what I forgot to mention, and I'm sorry for this oversight, is that the American dream wasn't accessible to all then. As you know, that's why we needed a civil rights movement. Because there were people from different ethnic minorities, members of the opposite sex, our female counterparts, the LGBT community, Latinos, and others who did not have access to that American dream. So, that's why we heard Martin Luther King say, and I have a dream. And Malcolm X saying, by any means necessary. Malcolm X's interesting story. When he came back from Mecca, he was a changed man. And was more willing to work with all parties to achieve equality. So that was the first thing I wanted to bring up. The other thing I wanted to mention, just two quick things, because I don't want to take up the whole podcast on corrections. But I was speaking in regards to gentrification, about how the high housing costs are really starting to impact all sectors of socioeconomic statuses or classes. Of course, the lower class or the poor and the middle class. And I said the upper class, and I meant to say the upper middle class. So that was a little bit of a faux pas, and, in case you heard it, I wanted to correct that. Although there probably are some upper class who are feeling this sting too. It's expensive here. I mean, $100,000 is considered low income. I saw another statistic that said if you are single and you're living in the Bay Area, you got to make $150,000 just to make ends meet. But I wanted to say upper middle class. And the final thing is when we were talking about Speaker Mike Johnson saying that how young men need to get back to work instead of playing video games. I had mentioned how millennials and Generation X played video games and worked, but I didn't mention, obviously, Gen Z, who's in the workforce as well, too. So, and again, as I said in the previous podcast, because, young people don't play video games and work. I mean, what a ridiculous comment. So with those things out of the way, I want to get to it. I have a lot of content to give to you today. I didn't really want to go back into tariffs that deeply, but this week we had a down week again in the market because of tariffs, and obviously that affects your 401ks, your 403bs, your pensions, your portfolios. And there's just been more trade war consequences, as I talked about in the first podcast, that was likely to occur. Now, I'm not a prophet. I'm not a guru. I can't see into the future. I have no crystal ball. The reason why that is happening is it's just basic economic principles that we discussed in the first podcast. You can listen to it. It's called We're Living in Tariff Hell. But you can also just look it up yourself on like Google or use ChatGPT. But we had a down week on the S&P, and that was because of the tariff news that came out that China was going to halt Boeing jet deliveries. We said how you can't be America first if you're not concerned with the impacts it's going to have on U.S. companies, particularly exporters, not just those who import like Boeing. We also talked about Ford. Ford now is pausing deliveries to China. They can't, it's going to affect their revenue. They can't be competitive unless they're in these markets. And what Ford is telling you, which is what, when you think American, my gosh, how do you not think Ford? First company to create the assembly line. I mean, Ford is like synonymous with American cars. So is General Motors. But from what I remember, from what I understand, Ford was first. And now, because of how high the tariffs are there, which is 125%, not due to China's fault, due to Trump starting this trade war, and China responding, retaliating with retaliatory tariffs, now Ford can't be competitive in that market. And they're going to pull their exports for the time being. Meanwhile, Trump went ahead and told NVIDIA that they couldn't export their, I think it's H20 processor. You can look it up. But it's, it's a big part of their business and part of their AI infrastructure. And they're not going to be able to export it to China indefinitely. NVIDIA gave some number, again, you can look it up, but it was significant into how much it's going to impact their business, their earnings. And of course, the stocks fell. Now, if you have a 401k or 403b or a pension, and those companies or firms that are managing your retirement plans are invested in those companies, which is likely, then you know what, you had a down week. So there's more trade war consequences, unfortunately, and literally I could take the entire podcast again talking about it, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to make this solely into an economic podcast. That wasn't the point of this economic That wasn't the point of this podcast, to make it into solely an economic podcast. But because it is impacting Americans so much right now, and because Donald Trump decided with Liberation Day to start a global trade war, we have to keep revisiting it. And so we'll talk about it today, but we're going to talk about other things as well too. We're going to talk about how is the ceasefire going with Russia and Ukraine. I can give you a hint. Not well, because Vladimir Putin is an alligator. And as Winston Churchill said, you can't appease an alligator. So we'll go more into that. We'll continue the discussion about Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie touring the country on their fighting oligarchy tour. They got incredible numbers in Idaho, by the way. The house was packed. So, for all those who say progressives can't win, maybe they can. Maybe they can. Now, obviously, there are certain areas in the country where they're not going to do well. But they're doing well in battleground states. But we're going to talk about, because I've been posting on my Facebook. You can follow me on Facebook, by the way, Victor Lecha III. Very easy to find. I'm the only Victor Lecha III, I think, on Facebook. But I've been posting on there, like, what would a third party look like? How would it operate within the political sphere? Because obviously Dems get worried that if the party splits, then Republicans are going to win in a lot of these races. And that will cede more power to Republicans and cede more power to the right. Republicans are really, there's two parties there. We're really four parties in two parties. Or in other words, there's two wings on each side of the main parties. You have progressives on Democrats. You have your normal Democrats or your centrist Democrats. You have your Reagan, McCain, Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, Liz Cheney Republicans. And then you have the Trump base. So what they're worried about is that if progressives split, that more power is going to get ceded to the Republican Party and more to the Trump wing. So we'll discuss how a third party can be, how it could operate, how it could function in a duopoly. It's not ideal. If we had a parliamentary system, it would be better, but we don't. But, first, before we get to those things, and I also have some other just little headlines I want to bring to you as well at the end of the podcast that are important. One of them I'll just say now. Netflix, actually, if your 401k, 403b, or your pension's invested in Netflix, or you are itself, you're doing quite well. Their earnings report came in phenomenal. In fact, they're projecting to increase their revenue by 2030. Now, here's the reason why I think that is. Because Netflix and streaming providers aren't subject to tariffs yet. Let's hope that President Trump never figures out a way to tariff streaming content. So that's just one of the little headlines I have for you. But I wanted to transition us to not speak directly about the trade war, but to speak about how some of the countries, some of our allies are being affected by the trade war, how they are responding. And one of them is Canada. As I mentioned to you last week, Canada is our number one trading partner, if not in the top three. And they, have suffered a lot due to this trade war that Trump has started. Not just with the tariffs that are at 25%, but also just, I don't know how else to say it, but the disrespect in regards to being the 51st state, to not respecting their sovereignty. And I have to be honest with you. As a Gen Xer, I've heard a lot of disrespect to Canada throughout the years, calling it American Junior, Lesser America, and that talk needs to stop. It's not helpful to building relationships, to maintaining those relationships. It's disrespectful. Canada is a sovereign nation. It's been a sovereign nation since I don't have the exact date, 1870 something. And they have a democratic government. They do world trade. They have an army to defend themselves. I visited Canada. It's gorgeous, by the way. You need to go. I was in Vancouver. I fell in love. I talk about it in my book that I wrote, How I Became Homeless with a Master's Degree. On my way immigrating to Great Britain, I went through Vancouver, and I was just, I was mesmerized, man. Vancouver's stunning. So we need to treat our neighbor in the north with a little more respect. But there is this concern that if the United States is becoming more isolationist, which is what President Donald Trump is doing with these tariffs, with his policies, with the rhetoric he is invoking or saying towards our allies, he is really kind of invoking or bringing up ideas from the past, like with James Monroe and Andrew Jackson, the Monroe Doctrine. So if we're going to become more isolationist, the question then is, who is going to fill that void in this half of the hemisphere? And the Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, he says that they're ready to do it. Canada must be looking elsewhere. This is, by Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney. Canada must be looking elsewhere to expand our trade, to build our economy, and to protect our sovereignty. If the U.S. no longer wants to lead, Canada will. And, the first question that an American might bring up is like, Canada's going to lead? No way, man. Yes, I think Canada could lead. Why not? If America is going to not take a back seat per se, but if they're going to step back, if they're going to retrace, if they're going to go isolationist, then who on that side of the hemisphere can lead? Canada can. Canada has great relationships with Great Britain. It's part of the Commonwealth. Prime Minister Mark Carney, after all of this really unacceptable rhetoric from Donald Trump, which, basically is like colonization talk. But, Canada's a sovereign country. But it very much echoes like imperialism from the past. After all of that talk and the tariffs, went to different countries, went to visit Great Britain and other European countries, and was accepted and was welcomed. Canada is actually larger than the United States. Canada has a lot of minerals, a lot of petroleum, and a lot of lumber. You kind of wonder why Donald Trump wants it to become the 51st state, right? But see, Canada, unlike the United States, has learned from its past. Now, the United States has learned from its past. I don't want to say it hasn't. Because we do see regulations in regards to cutting in national forests. We do see regulations in regards to oil drilling, offshore oil drilling. Now, a lot of that stuff is being eroded now due to this administration. But the reason why, I guess I should say, Canada has learned more, is what I want to say, from their history. A lot of this land is untapped. But instead of going there and just trying to colonize it, to try and enforce the people who live there, which are indigenous people, and bend them to their will, they have a system where it involves the tribes there. Each province, has a say in regards to their own provincial government. I don't think it's called the federal government, but the national government is also involved. I think the crown's involved too. In fact, I'm positive the crown's involved. So there's a lot of stakeholders at the table. So you don't have a trail of tears like happened here. You don't have a Dakota pipeline disaster. So, Canada is wanting to do that same kind of cooperation that it has domestically, internationally. And if America doesn't want to do that anymore, then Canada can step in. I mean, to be honest with you, obviously Canada's economy is smaller, their GDP is smaller, but you don't have to have those gaudy numbers to lead. The UK leads, France leads. We're talking on this side of the hemisphere with the absence of the United States willing to lead. Let me just give you some numbers here. I'm just kind of throwing this out there. But if 30 million Americans moved to Canada, that's just 10% of the population. I don't think it's really that much, considering you get universal health care, which we don't have, and subsidized education, which we don't have. Well, subsidized higher education, excuse me. I think you can find 30 million Americans willing to move to Canada. If that happened and they were spending as much as Canadians do right now, Canada would increase their GDP by 55%. They will double the size of their economy to 1.65 trillion. That's incredible. Just 10% of the population saying, adios, we're done here. We can't stand it anymore. We're going to go to Canada. National health care, subsidized education, more affordable. Now, there are places that in Canada are experiencing gentrification too. I want to be honest about that. But on the whole, more affordable. Now, of course, it depends where you're coming from, because there are some affordable places in the United States that haven't been yet subject to the ills of gentrification. But still, national health care, subsidized education, beautiful, beautiful country. They double the size of their economy to 1.65 trillion. The amount of tax revenue they would get, that would be additional to what they receive already from the Canadians who live there, would be an additional $545 billion. Right now it's $470 billion. It would more than double their tax revenue. They might be able to start a sovereign wealth fund. And true to form, Canada isn't waiting. Chinese refineries are now importing record amounts of Canadian crude after slashing their purchases of U.S. crude or oil by 90%. Let me say that in another way. In other words, China used to import a lot of petroleum from America. They've now cut that by 90%. So they're only importing 10% now from America. And I don't know if all of that's coming from Canada, the other 90% that they used to get from America. But they're importing a whole heck of a lot from Canada. Hey, Canada can step up. They are stepping up. And the question is, that's just the beginning, right? Like, where else? How else will Canada step up in regards to global trade, in regards to national security, global security? I'm interested. You know what? I say go for it, Canada. Go for it, Prime Minister Carney. Go for it, Canadians. You know, treat it like you treat hockey. How you dominate that sport. And by the way, I might get in trouble here by some Canadians, but I mean, Alex Ovechkin, what he did, incredible. Passed a great one. But look, there's never going to be anyone better than Gretzky. There's no way you can convince me of that. I saw him, man. He is the great one. Incredible. I gotta explain this to you. In Los Angeles, hockey was popular when I was growing up. The Kings were the hot ticket. This isn't Los Angeles. There's no ice. There's no snow. When there's rain there, people get into accidents. The only way there's ice is if it's indoors, climate controlled. speaking of climate control, if Canada ever decided to go ahead and with the approval with those indigenous people, start building and settling up there, because it's like 90% of their country, I'm not kidding, is unsettled. If they started to. Now, the question is, well, it's super cold there. We live in Phoenix, Arizona. We've been in hot places. I was in Saudi. I was in Riyadh. So why can't we do it? Well, some people say, well, it's the tundra, very hard to drill there. Well, couldn't we put like domes, like we're thinking about in Mars, like greenhouse domes? Maybe Elon Musk can help us with that. Oh, no, never mind, because we don't hire Nazis. Oh, man. Sorry, Elon, that's not fair. You're not a Nazi. You're just a white supremacist. Oh, dang. It's getting hot in the kitchen. Well, they say if you can't stand the heat, then get out of the kitchen. And AOC and Bernie, I guess I could say AOC, but I worked for a Congress member. I'm not going to say who, so I like to say their names formally. So that's why I keep correcting myself. But Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders are on fire. Their tour is so successful. This is a quote from, it's having good results. And this is a quote from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. On the way here, we got a very interesting piece of news. Some of the Republicans whose districts we visited just warned their leadership that they're not sure they can vote for Medicaid cuts now. Yes, that's what I'm talking about. And that's when protest works. And that would be a big win for the Dems, for the American people. For the American people. And we talked about that last week in regards to who these Medicaid cuts would affect. The elderly, the mentally ill, the poor, the most vulnerable. People need these services. So that would be a big win if these Republican Congress members are now worried, and senators, that if they vote for these cuts, that now their seats could be in jeopardy at the midterms. That would be a big win. And it shows again why progressive policies can work in this country. And to me, it shows again why we need a third party. We need to have this voice in the American political process. But people get worried. They say, if you do a third party, what's going to happen is it's going to hurt the main party, and we're going to allow the other party to get in. And they give the famous case in points. There's three main examples. One is Ross Perot, who, if you don't know, you can look it up on, Google, just who's Ross Perot. I saw him when I was in high school. He got 20% of the popular vote. That's how much people have been wanting a third party since the 90s. This is not new. By the way, multiple parties isn't new in American history. We've had multiple parties before. We just haven't had it in a very long time. It's difficult to have multiple parties when you're not in a parliamentary system. But getting back to Ross Perot, he was on the Republican side. He was conservative. And so we split that vote with Senator Bob Dole. I can't remember who his running mate was. And they lost to Clinton and Al Gore. So Republicans said, we can't split anymore. Now, Democrats have faced the same, specifically when Al Gore was trying to beat George Bush and lost in Florida due to, they say, Ralph Nader getting some of those votes that normally would have gone to Al Gore. You don't know who Ralph Nader is? He was a consumer advocate and wanted to establish a party to the left of the Democrats. And he was trying to get to this magic 5%. Now, when you get 5% of the vote, you get federal funding for your party. We'll go into that in another podcast. And the other most recent one was Jill Stein, who, when Donald Trump first ran, basically ran as well as a Green, because Bernie Sanders at that time decided not to branch off into a third party. He instead joined the Dems with Hillary Rodham Clinton, and which at that time, and I'm on record saying, was the smart move, because we didn't know how dangerous Donald Trump was, but we were hearing from the rhetoric and what he was saying, we were really concerned. And so even though there was this grassroots movement and there was a lot of energy behind Bernie Sanders, we felt we had to unite. I think the slogan was called Stronger Together. Now, there were certain states where Jill Stein ran on some of those who wanted to separate into a third party, who were upset that Bernie Sanders wasn't the candidate, and Jill Stein capitalized on that emotion, on that anger, and basically took those progressives into the Green Party. And there's certain states where if you look at the number of votes that Jill Stein received, if Hillary would have received those votes, she could have won that election instead of Donald Trump. So people get very leery and weary when you say third party. But I'm here to tell you a third party could work. Now, how would it work? Well, I got this idea, really. And to me, it's surprising that we haven't thought about this sooner. But I got this idea when I was living in Great Britain. There's a party to the left of Labour called Liberal Democrats, who are basically like the progressives here. Now, they had a great turnout, a great showing in the previous election. That last election was a tsunami for the left. Because not only did Labour have its second biggest showing since Tony Blair, who I'm sure you know who Tony Blair is. Most Americans know he was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. But that was like the largest wave for Labour ever coming into power. This was the second largest. And it would have been, I think, the largest if the Liberal Dems didn't do so well. Now, how did they do well? They went to targeted districts and they ran. They were politically intelligent. Their political strategist was amazing. So we do the same thing here. We already have independents. There are people who are registered as independents. Bernie Sanders himself is an independent, so he could just do this. We could just tell progressives to register as independents. Senator Angus King is also an independent. There are independents. I mean, it's very small, but there are. And these independents would run in safe districts. We know this. We know what are safe districts for the Democrats. We know what are safe districts for Republicans. And hopefully they win. And if they win in that district, then we would have more political representation in regards to progressive viewpoints and beliefs in Congress. And they would just caucus with the Democrats as independents, like Bernie Sanders and Angus King does now. And really, I hope Bernie hears this message somehow, because then we'd have more power as a party. As the left, we would have more power to be able to go ahead and have more of a say of what policies we want as a country and that we want brought up in the House or the Senate to be given to the president to sign. Speaking of the presidency, independents just wouldn't run a presidential candidate. Now, they could have their own primary if they wanted, just to see who that would have been. But they wouldn't run against a Democrat. And that way, then you preserve it. Equally, Republicans could do the same too, but the difference there is you're dealing with the name. And although Republicans are the party of Lincoln, we very well know that Republicans and Democrats kind of flip-flopped at some point. Because Democrats before were, they were in the South. They were the ones who wanted to make sure that slavery wasn't abolished. You're like, how did that switch? Well, you can do the history on it. And you can read up on it. So really, I say that the birth of this modern Republican Party was Ronald Reagan. So those Republicans like John McCain, Mitt Romney, Liz Cheney, Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, they're not going to want to break off into their own party name because they feel like, look, Ronald Reagan was first. Like we're not going to cede this name to Trumpers. And meanwhile, Trumpers aren't going to do that either because they have, for all intents and purposes, they've taken over the Republican Party. So, with the Republicans, it'd be more difficult to do. But they could still do it as like a wing of the party. But when you have your own party, you have more power. And, it's a good segue. Speaking of power, we know that Trump likes to use these power tactics of playing hardball, right? I think I might have mentioned it in my last podcast. No, actually I did not. I mentioned it in previous podcasts, excuse me. Oh, that was the other thing I forgot to mention. I have prequel podcasts that I haven't published yet. These were when I was in the United Kingdom. I wanted to see if I had a knack for this. If the podcast sounded compelling. And they did. So that's why I decided to do an official podcast. So in a previous podcast, I spoke about how, and also on my Facebook, you could just follow, how Trump does play hardball tactics. And he does it quite well, to be honest. But it brings up the question, why does he play hardball with allies? With Canada, Mexico, the European Union, etc., Japan, South Korea, with this global trade war. That's kind of weird. That's like if people come over to a dinner party and they're your friends and you snub them until they say hello to you. But the people who show up to your dinner party, who typically you haven't really liked, you haven't before really extended greetings to them, you're saying hello to them first. He's good at playing hardball with our allies, but why doesn't he play hardball with Vladimir Putin? Why doesn't he play hardball with Benjamin Netanyahu? It's an interesting question. Now, under his administration, they came up with this ceasefire on electrical grids. Okay, that's the first ceasefire. I told you, I always give credit where credit was due. It was violated an hour later by Russia when they bombed it. By Vladimir Putin, excuse me. So I expected Trump to use some hardball tactics. Instead, just words. I'm paraphrasing now, but Russia shouldn't do that. That was not good. We very well know that Russia responds to strength. Vladimir Putin responds to strength. He's not going to respond to just words. Since that first violation, Ukraine has said that Russia has violated that ceasefire more than 30 times. And to date, we've still done nothing. No more sanctions, no tariffs. Oh, that's a good point. By the way, do you know the only two countries who were not part of the global trade war known as Liberation Day? Russia and Belarus. Belarus, I mean, I don't want to call them a vassal state or a vassal country because that's rude to their sovereignty, but they're very much aligned with Russia. Very much. So it's interesting to me, mind-boggling to me, how Russia and Belarus were not included in the global trade war. They had no tariffs. You see how Donald Trump is not playing hardball here. Everything is lip service. Where's the I'm going to give you a 50% tariff if you don't come to the negotiating table? Donald Trump, he campaigned on that he ends wars. He doesn't start them. I mean, we're still into his presidency, and Benjamin Netanyahu has gone back to war in Gaza, and Vladimir Putin is not respecting any ceasefire agreement, and Trump is doing nothing. He's not using any of his hardball tactic tools that he used against Canada and Mexico to have them do more border commitments, more security on the border with the threat of tariffs. Why not? I don't know. And what's even more alarming is that Marco Rubio said that the U.S. is going to walk away from these talks, from these peace talks between Ukraine and Russia if no progress is made soon. Well, you're not giving the impetus, the motivation for Russia to come to the table. Russia responds to strength. And if you don't place more sanctions, and Donald Trump, he actually threatened that, or he promised that early on. He said, if Russia doesn't come to the table, I'm going to place sanctions and more tariffs. Where are they, Donald? We're waiting. Do you know that there's been almost 1 million innocent Russians killed because of Vladimir Putin's ambition and greed? His desire to make another Soviet Union in regards to land and territory and autocracy, just with the name Russian Federation. Unbelievable. Horrible. And we could do something. Donald Trump, I mean, we have power. He could put more sanctions on Russia. He could put tariffs on Russia. Now, granted, we don't do a lot of trade with Russia, but still, anything to bring them to the table. It's alarming. And now they're thinking of walking away. Well, you haven't done anything. Well, I should say you haven't done anything. I should say you haven't done anything since Russia has violated the ceasefire agreements that you've put in place. Where's the response? It's nowhere. It's absent. It's, the response is so silent you can hear a pin drop. It's like walking into a ghost town. There's no response. And we need that response. And if Donald Trump and Marco Rubio aren't willing to do it, then our European allies have to step up, remembering what Winston Churchill said, and give that response. And they have been. They have been supporting Ukraine militarily. They have been saying they're going to put peacemakers there. But again, if the United States will not lead, then other people have to lead until hopefully we get new leadership who wants to lead again on the world stage. I don't know. Could Canada lead on this? Probably not. They're on the other side of the hemisphere. But they could make a commitment. They could become a coalition of the willing. It's just, this administration in the first 100 days, it's been rather alarming. And I've been relatively fair. Again, you might be saying, oh, you're just a lefter. you'd be saying this you wouldn't be saying this if it was Biden. No, I wouldn't. If Biden was doing the same policies, or any Democratic president, or any Democratic president, I'd be saying the same. I mean, the amount of damage that's been done internationally and domestically with these tariffs, and not using your tools to stop the wars in in Gaza and in Ukraine is enormous. And, again, I don't want to make this a huge tariff podcast, but there's just so many more consequences we have to go to. Remember, I mentioned in the last podcast that because of a bond sell-off, I said mortgage prices were going up. I meant mortgage rates. They're linked to the 10-year bond because the 10-year bond is the benchmark for long-term loans, for home loans. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means like when bonds are being sold, that's happening right now as they're being dumped, the yields, the interest rates spike. That means your interest rates on your homes are going to be more expensive. And we're already seeing, look, the home market, the home buying market the last 2 years have been miserable. Way off the pace. And this year is looking like the same. This comes from Redfin, that homes are selling at their slowest pace in 6 years. 6. That's like before COVID. Inventory has hit a 5-year high in March. Wells Fargo says home sales aren't far off from the level seen in the wake of the Great Recession. Again, they say Great Recession. There is no Great Recession, Wells Fargo. You don't have the Dow or the S&P, whichever one. I'm sure they both went down a lot. They both went down a lot. Go down 58%. I think it was the S&P, and that's a recession. It's the Great Crash. I know we can't call it the Great Depression because that was in 1929, but this was the Great Crash. But home sales aren't far off from those levels. Remember, after the Great Crash, nobody wanted to buy homes anymore. They had lost them all. They had lost their savings. They had lost their 401ks. So we're not far from those levels. This is from Yahoo Finance. They're even saying that sales are at 1995 lows, and tariffs are causing people to cancel big purchases. 24% of people on a survey said they're canceling big purchases like cars and homes. Again, this is not good for the economy. This is not good for the American consumer. These tariffs. The tariffs are having such an effect domestically that now people who do want to buy homes are rushing into riskier loans, to adjustable rate loans. It's jumped at its highest in over 2 years. This is the highest it's been in the last 2 years. People flocking to adjustable rate loans. I mean, have you ever seen the movie The Big Short? Which talks about the Great Crash and these variable interest loans. They're risky. Now, am I saying that there's going to be another great crash, doomsdayer? No, I think we have more controls in place. But it's alarming. This administration isn't even in 100 days through 100 days yet. It's concerning. And, we do have other controls, but we never thought there would be another crash like 1929 crash or the 1987 Black Monday, and there was controls there, and it still happened. So, we need to be careful of this. We need to see these signs, and we need to cancel these tariffs. Donald Trump has to cancel these tariffs. They're not good for America. Let me give you some other things that's been happening just this past week. Foreign investors, they're getting out. They've dumped $6.5 billion of stocks. That's the second largest weekly outflow on record. Again, we talked about this last week, that money is leaving America. That's not good, people. That's not good. All of this points to a sign of a recession or something perhaps even worse. I mean, are you saying the D word, depression? We're a far way off from that. But the fact that many banks and Wall Street analysts are saying that a recession is possible now, and they don't know how these tariffs are going to impact the economy going in the future, means that, they're not ruling it out. We've never seen tariffs this high. That's what Chairman Powell said when he was speaking at the Economic Club in Chicago. Even when Donald Trump talks about this golden age of tariffs between 1872 and 1913, the tariffs weren't this high. And I already told you how that could impact. It's going to impact imports. So the prices are going to get passed to the consumer. That increases inflation. Exporting American companies, as we talked about at the top of the show, they're going to lose revenue. They lose revenue, that means they're going to have to make up the money somehow because they're not meeting their bottom lines. That could mean people losing their jobs, or prices on other goods going up domestically. Prices have already gone up 20% since COVID, even though inflation is low. That means inflation is low right now. So from right now, they're not increasing dramatically. But back then, when we had inflation at 9.7 or whatever it was, the prices were increasing dramatically. And it didn't come back down. You're paying 20% more on the same goods you used to pay before COVID. You're paying 20% more now than you did before COVID. Same goods. Going back to the S&P, it's down 10.3% in the first. Now, I took this a couple days ago. Oh, that still may be relevant or legitimate because the U.S. stock market was closed for Good Friday. But somewhere it's around here anyways, in regards to trading days. But the S&P 500 is down 10.3% in the first 72 trading days of 2025. That is the fifth worst start to a year in history. Fifth worst start. Well done, President Trump. Fifth worst start to the S&P in history. Again, that affects your 401ks. That affects your 403bs. That affects your pensions. Now, it would be worse if he didn't do a pause on those tariffs. That was a global trade war called Liberation Day. And, Chairman Powell is also very concerned. He's warning of decreasing growth combined with increasing and prolonged price inflation ahead. I'm going to read a little bit from this. This comes from the Financial Times. Powell said the president's tariffs announced so far had been significantly larger than anticipated. The same was likely to be true of the economic effects, which will include higher inflation and slower growth. This is just sound economic principles. The Fed receives a mandate from Congress, and their dual mandate is maximum employment and price stability. Chairman Powell said it's going to be difficult with these inflations as they start to settle in the economy. And of course, also, I would say the loss of revenue from companies who are exporting to places where there's retaliatory tariffs. It's going to be difficult to maintain maximum employment and price stability. One of the Fed's tools is cutting interest rates. That stimulates the economy. But the problem is it also can stimulate inflation. So you see how there's a quandary here. Now, the Fed has managed this before, but it just goes to show how these are really alarming signs, and it's all due to tariffs. We could go back to an economy that's humming one where we don't have concerns or fears or preoccupations, if Donald Trump would just cancel the tariffs and go back to making them targeted tariffs, limited tariffs, like he did against China with the steel tariffs, which I said in the first podcast. I'll say again. I'm on record saying that I was for that tariff. China was still dumping. It worked. But these mass tariffs, this tariff madness, this tariff mania, it's hurting the American economy. It's hurting the American consumer. It's hurting the American investor. And it's hurting the American with a retirement plan. And it's hurting American companies. Let me give you this statistic. Freight ship companies are the first to suffer from the trade war impact. Ocean freight volumes for U.S. imports are down 64%. Already down 64% are imports. And the U.S. exports down 30%. Those numbers are staggering. I mean, how many more consequences you want me to give you? You say one more. Okay. Bloomberg's reporting they are reporting what Goldman Sachs has said, which said because of this global trade war and how we've treated our allies, the tourism industry is expected to lose $90 billion of US dollars because of how poorly this administration has treated our allies. These tariffs are not good, people. They need to be canceled. This administration needs to take a 180 quickly before it does more damage to the economy, more damage to Americans. And excuse me, you might hear some papers like flipping or turning. I did that one on purpose. I wanted to get to the last page of today's podcast, but I just want to finish that point and close this loop that these tariffs, as you heard in this podcast, in the previous podcast, are damaging this economy. It's damaging to America. They have to get repealed. We have to repeal these tax cuts. We have to get canceled. They have to get canceled, as China says. And I hope I brought some balance to you today on this podcast. It's what I'm striving to do. You know, I want to give you a balanced podcast. And I want to end, I know last week I ended on a down note, talking about the ghost of FDR, whether he'd be disheartened or disappointed with the Democratic Party. So I wanted to end on a little lighter note, give some levity. First, and I don't think this is due to the tariffs, although it may be, but probably not because it just happened. But Forever 21 is closing. I have a hard time believing that. I mean, that was like a millennial store, right? I mean, people loved that department store. My friend, she told me she was in there and it looked like a thrift shop. Can someone play Macklemore, please? The thrift shop song. Dun, 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 dun. And then finally, what I wanted to bring to you today was in San Francisco on the Embarcadero. And for those who don't know where the Embarcadero is on San Francisco, it's right on the water. It's gorgeous. But apparently they have unveiled a statue, a sculpture. And you say, of what? A naked woman. Yes. A naked woman sculpture in San Francisco on the Embarcadero. I mean, of course, San Francisco would do that. I have a feeling that the Statue of Liberty is going to get more visits from tourists than the naked woman in San Francisco. But we'll have to wait and see. I think Lady Liberty will shine much brighter. Well, that was it for today. Thank you so much for listening to El Maestro. I will see you in a couple days. Stay lit.